Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Starting the second half of the show. If you couldn't join me for the last segment, I talked about the contradicting rumors coming out of the Combine on Justin Fields and what to make of all of that. Now, that allows me to jump into the second half of the show, but before I jump into the topic, again, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions, any interactions you want to talk during the live show about, please use the tip and donations link with any questions that you may have. The tip and donations link is GSMCPodcast.net. Again, if you're listening to this, it's GSMCPodcast.net. Just using this link with your question, it puts it to the top of the list so I can see it as it comes in. I'm able to read it on the air, and it's a lot more fun interacting with you guys and seeing any questions, reactions that you might have to the show and any of the topics that go on during the show. It's also a massive help for this show and other shows across the network, and it's greatly appreciated every time you guys use the tip and donations link with any of your questions. But going back to the topics at hand, some stories that kind of arose and were talked about at the NFL Combine among people, away from all the prospects and all the attention that they garner, talking about other issues that still have to be resolved. Some of the things that we know after the Combine that have become a little bit more concrete is that the Vikings, as everyone knows, are trying to get an extension done with Justin Jefferson, and he's expected to get a lot of money, and that sort of leads people to believe that, they could lose out on their star pass rusher, Delaney Hunter. He's rumored to want a lot of money as well, potentially north of $20 million, kind of in the range maybe of a Myles Garrett at $25 million. I don't think he'll get north of 25, in TJ Watt range, Nick Bosa range, but he's produced that on average has had 14 sacks in the last 4 seasons that he's been healthy, which is the biggest thing, but he feels that he can bring that to the negotiation table, and on that he could garner this sort of contract which would be north of $20 million, and there's no way the Vikings can afford that. Plus the extension for Justin Jefferson, which I'm sure is their number one priority, on top of trying to re-sign Kirk Cousins and get a quarterback under contract. One of those three is most likely going to have to go or not be happy with a contract offer from the Vikings, and it's most likely going to be Delaney Hunter, as it's been rumored and has become more and more likely to happen. And obviously, if he does hit the free agency market, he's going to be a very heavily targeted free agent with the contract negotiations of Josh Allen and Brian Burns likely heading towards a franchise tag. Delaney Hunter could be the best option for a lot of these teams, and I'm sure a lot of them won't hesitate to pay him this sort of money to keep producing at the level he has been, and he could add a lot to a lot of defenses out there. So that's one of those things that we know a little bit more. Another thing, I should say, that I thought was pretty interesting was that a lot of people in Indianapolis have been kind of passing around the word that, that they believe the Cincinnati Bengals franchise tagged T. Higgins so early. He was actually the first one to be tagged so early that it kind of leads them to believe that he could most likely be traded later this offseason. I've mentioned before just on these shows that Jamar Chase is also due for a contract extension, and you don't really know how much money T. Higgins is going to want, but you know more that Jamar Chase is going to want a lot of money, top of the league, top of the receiver market type of money. Probably close to Justin Jefferson, if you're being honest, because of the relationship that they have. I'm sure they always have a competition at least going on between both of them because they went to LSU obviously together. They've been so connected throughout their whole careers in college, now into the NFL. If Justin's getting a lot of money, you can almost bet 100% that Jamar Chase is going to want the same amount, if not close to Justin Jefferson. So that's going to be a lot of money already on Chase. And if T. Higgins wants also a good amount, it's not going to work out already. I think a lot of people have given up on Tyler Boyd as well. There's no chance he's coming back with the kind of money that T. Higgins and Jamar Chase are going to want if they choose to keep both of them. So Tyler Boyd's already been ruled out, and T. Higgins is also right now at a I would say a 60-40, 60 that he stays and 40 that he goes among teams. But it is gaining traction just because they have other free agents to worry about, as well as they've already paid Joe a lot of money. So if you got Joe to stay, I'm sure he's going to advocate a lot for Jamar Chase to stay, his main target. He's going to get a lot of money. So T. Higgins right now, he's under contract. Zach Taylor has said that he wants him to stay, but it's getting traction that people think they don't want to lose him, and instead of losing him for nothing, they'll trade him and get something in return from him and kind of sacrifice that and at least get some compensation for him. If they do trade for him, I expect nothing less than a second for him, just based on his production. He's still young. I think he's just turned 25, or is going to be 25, so he's entering those crucial years, that prime of his career. If he signs a big deal elsewhere, or actually if he gets traded elsewhere in a sign-and trade, the team wanting him is going to have to produce a lot of compensation for the Bengals to get their hands on him. There's a lot of teams out there that need receivers, especially with Mike Evans now off the market. T. Higgins starts to become a bit more appetizing for these teams. But on the wide receiver train, we're going to move to Brandon Aiyuk. And he's another interesting one because the 49ers want to keep him. They want to get his contract sorted. But with a lot of talks around them and them having to make some big decisions in terms of negotiations and who they cut, who they keep, who they really value, he could be sacrificed just because of the contract he's going to want. And, there was a lot of hostility, bad feelings after the Super Bowl where he wasn't really targeted as much and he didn't really perform to the level that he expects himself to. He posted something on Instagram. He's been kind of cold about it in his responses to the contract negotiations. So he also could be a serious trade candidate if no extension gets done, if the 49ers feel that this isn't going anywhere. Instead of losing him for nothing, same thing as T. Higgins, they'll trade him for something and you probably get a good haul back for him. Again, second round, probably the minimum. Multiple picks could be in talks as well. But another team could get their hands on him, and he could be a number one on a lot of different teams that have no receivers. Just off the top of my head, he could go to the Titans and be a number one. The Patriots potentially with a new number one if Kendrick Bourne doesn't re-sign there. And then potentially wanting to trade Devontae Parker. They're going to need a wide receiver one if they draft the quarterback number 3. So those are options for Aiyuk and the Niners. But again, it's starting to become more concrete, but nothing has been sincerely reported. Talks around cornerbacks as well, like Jarius Sneed has been discussed. A potential landing option for him has been the Detroit Lions. The reports around the Lions have said that they want to sign a top-tier cornerback one. They were lacking that really a lot last year. I think it hurt them a lot against the Bucs with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. Just in that game, I know they won, but the Bucs almost came back in that game, and it just hurt them in other games as well with the Niners. They don't really have a bona fide number one, and L'Jarius Sneed has proven to be that. So there's been talks around them potentially willing to pay him a lot of money in the market and make him one of the top earners and get him on their team as well. But we're going to see where that goes. The Falcons are always there, like I mentioned last week. In the same division as the Falcons, Marshawn Lattimore has started to become a lot more prevalent in trade talks just because of the Saints cap situation. Like I mentioned, they're always very deep in the deficit, and he is a high earner for them. And, he's in a spot where right now he earns a lot. The Saints might have to make a move if they can't figure out other negotiations elsewhere. He could be a trade candidate, and any team, again, would be likely to sign him. The Dolphins could be one after losing Xavier Howard in free agency, just cutting him, not being able to re-sign him. They could be an option as well for Marshawn Lattimore and the defensive back market, as well as Christian Wilkins. It's becoming more and more serious that he's not getting the franchise tag. A lot of reporters and a lot of analysts have said he's going to hit the free agency market, and a big favorite for Wilkins has been the Houston Texans, with Jonathan Grenard also being a free agent. they could afford to lose him and sign Christian Wilkins, especially because of their defensive tackle position not being the strongest. They could sacrifice some of the money to Grenard and use it for Christian Wilkins, who's coming off his best year, recording 9 sacks and just being one of the best defensive tackles in terms of stuffing the run, just being a menace in there, not allowing anything to get through him. He could add a lot to that defense for the run defense. They already have Will Anderson on the side. You add Christian Harris to that. I'm sure they could find another pass rusher in this draft or sign another one if they choose on top of Christian Wilkins. Where does that leave Saquon? You're going to have to pick and choose there, most likely, between an expensive pass rusher and Saquon. But Christian Wilkins has been rumored to go there as well, as I'm sure he will be to a lot of teams that are looking for a player of his caliber. And just the last thing, funny enough, on the day today that Jason Kelce retired, ESPN's Jeremy Fowler has spoken to a lot of sources that they also believe Fletcher Cox will also be joining Jason Kelce, retiring this offseason. Obviously, nothing has been concrete, but that's sort of the feeling that Jeremy Fowler's getting, and a lot of people are starting to get with him. Jason Kelce has already retired today, and I'm sure Fletcher Cox, he's also an unrestricted free agent. How big of a market is he going to garner? He might decide that it's best for him to just retire this offseason, but we're going to have to wait and see. And then just the last thing to wrap it up, some things to still be determined, things that haven't been really talked about as much. The Dolphins and the Eagles have some decisions to make on their wide receiver twos, Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith, who are contract extension eligible for the first time this offseason, but they already have a lot of money going to A.J. Brown and Tyreek Hill, and the Dolphins are already in a cap deficit. It's not looking great for them, so they're going to most likely wait on them, but that's another thing kind of looming for these teams that have a lot of talent, but they have to pay these guys as well, and some tough decisions could be made there, but we're going to have to wait and see. Joey, and in terms of the Chargers, moving on to them, they have a lot of salary cap issues to figure out, mostly with Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams. They actually take up more than half of the Chargers' cap, and that's ridiculous for only 4 players. But the sense is that some of them are going to have to go, but really nothing's been made on who's going to go. And right now, the sense I'm getting from a lot of reports, articles that I've read, it seems that Keenan Allen will most likely restructure his deal and he'll be open to staying. Same with Joey Bosa, just because edge rushers are very limited. You're not going to find another one probably better than Joey Bosa on the market right now. And Khalil Mack and Mike Williams, it leaves them on the outside looking in, because Khalil Mack, of his age, he still produced a lot, so he could garner a good market for himself. He's been in trade talks as well, so the Chargers could get something from him. And Mike Williams is coming off a pretty bad injury, and he's most likely to, if not be cut, just trade or not traded, be allowed to test the free agency market. But those guys are in a very tough spot right now in terms of cap. The Chargers are trying to get something going with Jim Harbaugh there, and they can't really do that if a lot of their money is going to just 4 guys. So they're going to have to make a decision there, but nothing's really made too much of that. And just the last thing, I thought was interesting was that former Eagles safety C.J. Gardner-Johnson is a free agent now, and he's getting talks back to potentially signing again with the Philadelphia Eagles. They released Kevin Byard recently, and that project didn't go well. They actually signed Terrell Edmonds and let him go because of his performance. They traded him for Byard to the Titans. So now really their only safety that's really been there and produced a good amount has been Reed Blankenship, but he needs somebody else to complement him. That safety for the Eagles hasn't really been a strong suit as of late. So he's kind of been voiced to return to them. A lot of questions still there. He could return to the Lions if they so choose, but the Titans have been interested in him, and the Eagles have always been an aggressive team to go after guys they want. But the kind of money that CJ would want on a multi-year deal, we'll have to wait and see where that kind of ends up. And that kind of wraps up that segment just on questions still to be answered and things that have started to pick up a bit more traction, but we're still going to have to wait and see what these things pan out to. It's just interesting to see where these things are at this point, because a lot is just chatter right now. Not really too much action until, like I mentioned before, the league year starts on March 13th. But saying that, I'm going to send it to the last break of the show. And on the other side of it, I'm going to talk about J.J. McCarthy. Is he worth a top 5 pick? Could he have some intangibles that are better than some of the top 3 guys? All that and more coming up after this break. Don't go anywhere. You're not going to want to miss the talk on J.J. McCarthy.